Hello, Nick. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for giving me and whoever's listening your time. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and, as long as you want, what brings you here today and your journey through life?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike, for inviting me today. I'm dialing in indeed from Southeast Asia. But I was born in Sweden, educated in Australia, and then I moved to Southeast Asia 21 years ago. My company is based in Singapore, but in Southeast Asia, I'm spending my time between Indonesia, Vietnam, and Singapore, Malaysia, and today I'm in Thailand.
And how can you tell us maybe a little bit about growing up in Sweden and what brought you to move to Australia?
Yeah, so I grew up in Sweden, in a small little town, and already at the age of 17 I moved out. I didn't really get along well with my father. I didn't perhaps like, being controlled, so I was looking for a job and moving out as soon as I can. Then later on, I wanted to go further, and I looked at a map, and the far away from Sweden you can go is Australia. So I thought, let's go and have a look there, and that brought me there, and lived there almost 6 years. But then I realized that perhaps it's a little bit far away from all my family and relatives and so on. And halfway was Southeast Asia, and as it happened, as I lived in Australia a few years, I had been traveling back and forth. And every trip you had to stop over somewhere. So I used to stop in Hong Kong, Bangkok, Singapore. And every time I was there, I tried to build up some network because I had a vision of potentially getting a job there one day. And that's what happened.
Thank you. And I've actually been to Sweden. I've been to Strängnäs, which is, I think, like an hour or so outside of Stockholm. We have some friends there. I'm not sure. Where in Sweden are you from?
In the south, it's called Kalmar, pretty close to Denmark, actually.
Cool. Thanks. And you talk a lot about, in your other interviews, your addiction, alcohol, relationship, all those kind of things. Was that happening when you were younger? And is that part of the tension at home? Or can you tell us a little bit about what was going on at home or in your experience with substance use and that kind of mental health?
Yeah, sure. Well, growing up in Sweden, I started to have alcohol for the first time when I was 14 years of age. It wasn't really a problem then. It was not too much quantities and not too much of it. But once I moved to Australia, then warmer climate and so on, it was easier to drink and it was also cheaper. And in Sweden, while alcohol was quite controlled, you have to buy it in a special shop on the weekend, and only open on weekdays and so on. In Australia, it was socially acceptable everywhere. And coming from dark and cold Sweden, sunny and hot Australia, I didn't think about it much. But, I was playing golf and hanging out, and alcohol was just becoming more and more part of my life, and everyone was drinking. So I didn't really reflect on it as an issue. And I was socializing, living the life of as most Westerners do, should I say, drinking. And then when I moved to Asia, working in sales, business development, I found that, the more I drank, the better my results were, the higher the bonuses, the more promotions I got. Because I took out the clients and entertained them, and especially if you're based in Southeast Asia, you work for American clients or European clients, they come over to visit you in Asia, then you have to take them out and entertain them. And if you do that well, maybe you get more contracts. So the bosses I had were cheering on me, and the more they cheered on me, the more I went out and the more business I brought in. So I associated alcohol with something which was very, very positive, and I didn't have any negative effects for many years, actually, Mike. It was later on they started to creep in.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And when you moved to Australia, were you sort of just went off on your own, right? No kind of particular connections there. As you said, you looked at the farthest place away on the map and said, I'm going there. What was it like figuring all of that out, I guess? And you do talk a lot, maybe it's further on in your story, about the idea of, loneliness, but you also do connect it to being a business leader and the loneliness around that, which I find really interesting and definitely not often discussed. I know those are sort of the same ideas, but a little different. So maybe just what was it like being on the other side of the world on your own? Was it amazing. And then how did that start impacting you as your career, I guess, or as your success business-wise started to develop?
Yeah, so being away from home, not having the parents around and, in the other part of the world, and we're talking late 90s here, so not even social media, right? So I felt quite free. I could be myself. I moved there with an ex-girlfriend, and she thought it was too far away from home. She moved back home, but I said I'm staying, and that's what I did. And I was quite committed to graduate from university over there, which I studied and played golf and really enjoyed my life. Became independent and so on, and I didn't suffer from loneliness over there. I had good friends at university and so on, and loneliness crept in a bit later on in my career, and typically around when I lived in Indonesia and so on as an expat. And it was when I came in higher roles, because if you start at the lower level, you're an account executive in a firm, there's many account executives, then you become account manager perhaps, then there's more of them, and then as a director you start to perhaps lead a team, and then there's still a few around. But once you're a general manager and managing director of an organization, then there's no one else at your level in the office, and most things are supposed to be confidential, kept quiet about, and you have to deal with all the big decisions and trying to sort them out. And I didn't use mentors, I didn't use peer groups, mastermind groups, I didn't have any safe spaces with coaches and so on to really help me with those things. So when it became big issues later on, which there are in senior roles, and I didn't know how to cope with it, and alcohol at that time became my coping mechanism. So if the pressure was on, it was too much to deal with, I didn't seek help for it. Instead, I went to the bar after work and I drank. And that perhaps is quite common. People many times will leave the office going together, say, oh, that was a stressful day, let's go for a few drinks and wind down and so on. So even at that stage, I didn't realize that this was an issue. But it became an issue later on when it became a daily affair as opposed to something that you do once a week.
Thank you. Okay. I can't help but, what would you say, indulge my curiosity or interest in you. Were you a collegiate athlete in golf? I love golf. I golfed a lot as a kid. Unfortunately, my drug and alcohol addiction derailed that journey. And I'm starting to bring it back into my life in the last year or two, which is really lovely. Can you tell me a bit about that? Was it a big part of your life? And what did you study in university? And yeah.
Yeah, so I lived on the Gold Coast in Australia. It's easy to call this the Gulf Coast because I remember already back then, I think they had 47 golf courses, and I fell in love with golf over there. I played in Sweden, but it was short seasons and so on. In Australia, I could play all year round. And at university, I became a natural leader. They ran weekly golf tournaments and so on. I became the golf president, and we had 400 golfers in the club organizing all these tournaments and so on. As it happened, then also we played other universities in university game and so on in pennants, and I also became the captain of the university, so I was paid to fly around all over Australia playing the best courses, which was wonderful. I should say that I wasn't the best golfer, because you could actually study a Bachelor of Golf at that university, which attracted some of the best talent around the world to come over. And I was, however, a good leader, and I didn't normally play myself in important games because I knew that wasn't the best. But yeah, I was hovering around scratch, though, but never any big successes. I guess not natural talent. I think I enjoyed the leadership of it. I enjoyed the social side. I did also enjoy the 19th hole and playing some pool and drinking beer afterwards. So I think that was what I enjoyed more than the actual winning and top performance in golf. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. That sounds like a lot of fun. Okay. And so then sort of rewinding back to what you were saying before about as your career progressed, as you became sort of more successful in the corporate sphere, the social network or circle or ability to, I guess, be around people and have other people to bounce ideas off, all that sort of stuff started to diminish. And, after I've spent hours and hours and years and around thousands of people in workplace environments, events, consulting, all those kind of things. And I'm trying to think, I don't think I've ever, and maybe I have, but not significantly, heard somebody really talk about what you were just describing, sort of the loneliness at the top. I guess everyone just assumes you're supposed to do all that on your own. I mean, I don't really know. I guess as that continued for you and it became more difficult, or however you would describe it, can you maybe share a little bit about how that continued to get more difficult for you, or what were some of the consequences that started happening, or the struggles that you started to have?
Yeah, so at the time, and I can mention around, should we say, 12, 13 years ago, I was perhaps at the peak of my career. I was leading a big international medical company in Indonesia, servicing the big oil and gas and mining companies, some of the biggest mines in the world. And we had over 70 medical facilities at the time, and I was the general manager then, but really responsible for the growth, the business development, the client relationships, and so on. And I was doing really well. I brought in some big clients, and I had a very good reputation, good line, good relationship with my boss. In fact, I used to spend a weekend at her place having barbecue. You know, we were chatting, talking about everything, being very, very friendly with each other. And I felt I had a very strong relationship. It's only now I realize that it wasn't because I wasn't open, I wasn't vulnerable, I wasn't honest with her. And one example was, for example, where I was falling short was in Microsoft Excel numbers, the big sheets when we were bidding for projects and so on. Yes, I had a team to deliver on that, but I remember that they also were not very good in that, and that really stressed me out. I tried to spend extra hours. I brought the work back home, and I remember working on the weekends, trying to figure it out, but still making mistakes and so on. But if I'm looking back at that, all it would have taken was that I was honest about it, that I would have explained that I have some issues here, that I needed some additional resources, and that my team might have been falling short and so on. But rather than having that conversation, because that would show that I'm not on top of things, I was hiding that conversation. I didn't talk about it. And over time then, I started to really see myself as a failure. I started to worry that maybe I will be terminated over this and so on. And I remember when I saw emails coming in from my boss, I thought, oh, this must be the termination message. Nothing ever happened. No one ever found anything or any issues. It was just in my mind and how I perceived it. And as this went on over about 1 year time, I started to think that it's better I resign rather than being terminated. So I drafted my resignation letter, and sitting on that for 3-4 months. And as I had drafted it, I started to plan for my departure as well. I started to already think, and I saw myself already in other roles and so on. So and when I actually hit send and sent it, then I was already switched off, and they were in complete shock, and they couldn't understand why I would resign. And then they asked me, what's wrong? Can we help you with another role? We have this and this opportunity. We have roles for you in Central America, South America. What about Dubai? And all kind of things. But I didn't respond to anything, because in my mind, I already had made a failure of myself, and I wasn't worthy of anything. And then after that, I just jumped from job to job and created a mess of myself.
Wow, thank you. That's such a beautiful description of, I'll use the language of, disease, illness, pathology, problem of sort of drinking and loneliness and mental health problems, whatever you want to call it. People use all kinds of different words. I'm not sure if you use particular words. Wow, yeah, that's beautiful. So I guess one thought as you're talking is, when people, and myself included in different ways, cross a line of, I guess it's sort of the fear of acknowledging what is. So as you mentioned with the spreadsheets and asking for help, and then because whatever it is in us that can't bridge that gap or open up about it, then of course the mind goes to all the storytelling and all the rationalizations. And I don't know if you're familiar with rationalize, justify, minimize, that language. But we go into all of that and create these worlds that we live in that are so disconnected from reality. And it's so profound because it jails us in some sense, right? We live in that box of delusion or avoidance or dishonesty, mostly to ourself, of course. And then, as you say, you resigned, you didn't respond to emails, and then off you went on to your journey elsewhere. Would you add anything to that, or how would you describe that in other ways? And then can you tell us a little bit, as you said, jumping job to job, kind of what happened from there?
Yeah, and I can remember at this time that one of the anonymous 12-step programs for
Yes.
alcoholics was actually hosted by us, because this was a medical facility and they had meetings, I think, 3 times a week in our meeting room in the office, the floor below me, where I was the general manager. And I remember walking past that room thinking, those poor buggers who cannot handle the alcohol, you know, and at that time I was sort of the guy who used to, you know, drink 3 beers at night and going home after that because I wanted to exercise and be healthy the next day. Little did I know at the time that it would only take that I walk out of that job and lose myself, and 2 years later or 2.5 years after that, I would find myself at rock bottom, because I was clearly delusional in that sense that I thought I had no problems with it whatsoever, and I just cannot believe it, you know, when I had to go into that, not in that room in that building, but when I had to go to those programs, I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah, can you you describe it so lovely in that sense of, oh, look at all those people over there, so to speak. I don't have any of those problems. We can't fathom ourselves in that context until we do, I guess. How did you end up there, or what was sort of the journey, you know, as much as you want to describe or share, from resigning from that job and finding yourself at rock bottom, as you describe? And I love the saying of rock bottom, which is another challenge with people in substance abuse or whatever you want to call it, is we compare ourselves to other people all the time. I'm not as bad as that person. I'm not as bad as this. I still have this. And I like the description of a bottom as when we decide to stop digging. Can you kind of describe, as much as you want, what brought you there and when did you make that decision?
Yeah, and it took me almost 3 years, and yes, I also enjoyed myself a lot during that time. It was not all down. I was perhaps enjoying my life a little bit too much, you know, catching up on having controlled myself for so long. I was letting go, but with that also I filed for a divorce, which made me even more lonely. After 13 years marriage, my ex-wife moved back to Sweden. Our son was 5 years of age at the time, and that was painful for me. It was even more painful later on when I did sober up. But during that time then, I didn't really know where I wanted to live, what company to work. I went through a lot of savings, investing in some companies here and there. Everything went south. And therefore, you know, I started to almost be bankrupt. And with that then financial insecurities creep in and so on. And at that stage, and because I didn't have anyone to talk to, I wasn't open and honest with anyone. I kept it all internally, trying to hold it together. What happened eventually was that I started to, you know, lose my health. I gained a lot of weight, about 60 pounds more than now. And eventually my left foot swallowed up. It became swollen like an elephant foot. And at the time, I didn't know what it was. It was later on diagnosed by as a psychosomatic illness by a psychiatrist. Basically, because I wasn't expressing myself, I was pushing all my emotions and feelings internally. That was the body's way of explaining itself, and that helped me though, in the sense that I couldn't put on a shoe, so I couldn't go out, I couldn't go across the road, you know. And that's when people start to be suspicious. And I had then met a woman who is now my second wife. And I explained to her how I felt. And she was completely shocked and surprised and dragged me to a doctor. And that was really, you know, when I understood that this was rock bottom. It was my breakup call. It was what broke the pattern. And the fact that my secrets was exposed and I started to speak, that's when I started to feel better. And for every time I shared my story and about my, I started to recover. And that's what, even today, Mike, thank you for allowing me to share my story and releasing more of that pain that was sitting so deeply inside me.
Yeah, thank you. I get my emotions are often at the surface, and I'm getting a little emotional as you share that. Thank you. It's beautiful. Um, it's difficult. I think everyone understands what it's like to hold things inside and let them out. But I think as people listening on my side of this have heard me share this often, but my story is similar and different, of course. And that pain of keeping everything inside is so horrible, and we don't realize how horrible it is until we start sharing it, I think. Or perhaps we get more insight into how horrible it really is, and the contrast to what it feels like to be able to share it and to stop keeping everything inside. And that was a really nice way to put it. Thank you. So from there, perhaps you start, or you get dragged to the doctor from, with your partner at the time. And I guess, what was your journey into recovery, and how did you start to heal?
Yeah, so after we had been to the doctor, we also went to a common friend of us who we knew had gone through some mental health and alcohol challenges before. And this lovely lady, I remember when she looked at me at the time, she said, "You will be able to smile again," because this was my first day basically being sober. So she saw I was quite fragile. And I did believe her. She gave me some hope by saying that, and she also gave me a couple of phone numbers. With that, I was welcoming in the world of recovery, and with that, I felt that a lot of the stigma and the shame I was carrying then was lifted, because I felt that people had been there before, they gone through it, and if they gone through it, I should go through it as well. And with that, I haven't had a drink since that opportunity to go in there, and that was a true blessing. And as they say, when you are in there, it's about getting the help you need, and then it's about paying it forward and giving back. And that's the journey I'm on now, and that's why I'm with you on this show today, Mike, as part of also my recoveries, by sharing my story to others and keep reaching out. And I've had a few conversations already today with new people who need to come into the program and to get into recovery. So it's about always being there, and that helps me and reminds me of where I was and where I don't want to go again.
Yeah, thank you. It's lovely to hear that. And so, can you tell us a little bit about, I guess from there, how did you... what are you sort of doing now work-wise, and how did that journey reopen your life, or I don't know how you would describe it exactly. How did you get back into work? And I know you also, I think you did an Ironman, if I read you, did my research properly. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and kind of where, just how you kind of rebuilt yourself in that sense?
Yeah, so in the world of recovery, then I wanted to really double down on it, and I continued down that path really. And I said to myself, I'm going to continue this journey for the rest of my life, and that means whenever I feel I've achieved something, there's something else to do. Yes, you have the steps in the recovery program, but I've gone beyond that, educating myself as a coach at the master level, NLP coach as well, and I'm studying now actually at the School of Positive Psychology, Therapy and Counseling, and I get a postgrad diploma in that, and even a master's down the line. So that's that forever learning mindset has really helped me, by being curious and constantly looking at myself, challenging myself, and keep giving back to others. And then in the journey as a coach, it's been wonderful helping people, and also in a team coaching environment and training workshops and so on, helping teams to do that. And it's really now helping the teams to connect through vulnerability, by being open, by creating a culture where people actually share about the challenges. And so my story then can ignite others, and there's constantly many other leaders who find themselves and recognize themselves in my story of keeping things secret and silent, and then basically creating instead this culture, this psychological safety culture where they're not scared to share.
And you also, okay, I gotta channel my thoughts here a little bit.
And I forgot the Ironman journey as well, Mike.
Sure, okay, whatever. Yeah, I was gonna follow up on that, but sure, you can tell. Yes, share a little bit about that. Yeah.
So I used to do triathlons before
Okay.
my rock bottom. I did 2 Ironman events before, and I was suffering both times. I perhaps had a lot of pressure on my body through work and not being able to live at my best, plus the alcohol consumption and so on. So I remember the first race, I basically collapsed and crawled over the finish line. I couldn't even catch my flight back home the next day. That's also in how much pain I was. The next one was in 2015, pretty close before I started to really go down. That was in Australia, in Melbourne, and I remember cramping in the ocean and thinking that I was going to drown. I managed to make it back, but it was not a pretty affair. It was very, very painful race for me. So after then rock bottom and repatching myself, I had a lot of fat to lose. So I thought it would be pretty good to get back into that, which I did step by step. But this time I also didn't do it alone. I did it with a coach and really trying to learn from others, being part of a group and so on. You get topping up my social health by swim academies, run academies, bike clubs and so on, triathlon clubs, having a triathlon coach. And by doing that, then I've had a lot of more fun and really learning a lot better, and keep expanding and keep getting better. And I'm turning 50 now in a few months here, and just last year I hit basically all my records, including qualifying for the World Championship in my age group in the half Ironman distance for the first time. So just applying that curiosity and being open for feedback and forever learning in triathlon really helped as well.
Thank you. That's wonderful. That's inspiring to hear. I had 2 kind of pathways. One was your application of what it is, drive, if you will, or desire to pursue learning and growth and all those kind of things in the domain of where you're describing with the coaching and the consulting and the positive psychology stuff, and potentially, moving down that track. That's one thing. And the other is a lot of stuff that I've discussed in workplaces, in the work I've done there. I don't do too much of that anymore, but is this balance in a workplace environment of, we often use the words compassion versus responsibility. And in certain workplaces, this idea of being vulnerable and open isn't going to go well for a lot of people. Perhaps being vulnerable and open in that particular workplace. And other workplaces are more conducive to that. And also, we're there to work. And so, in this push of being open at work and mental health at work and yada, yada, all that stuff, I think we've lost the idea that we are there to work. This isn't really about dealing with our life problems at work. And I know I'm generalizing a little bit. Can you comment a little bit on that, how you see that tension and that balance, and how you've seen people navigate those things?
Yeah, I think we need to be vulnerable in the sense that we discuss our work-related challenges with our boss, with our mentors, with our teams, and do not hide them. That kind of vulnerability. We don't have to come in and overshare what is going on in our personal life and our romantic relationships with everybody. I think that one we can have safe spaces externally. We can have friends, we can have personal groups where we can talk externally, and coaches and so on. However, if it's something that really the boss should know, we shouldn't keep it secret. And the issue is, if the culture is not that we are open and vulnerable from the top, then that really spreads all the way down. So the issue is then, if someone is the kind of boss I was, then naturally my team would not come in and share what challenges they were facing either.
Great. Yes. Thank you. That's a great distinction between, and just so I understand you properly, the vulnerabilities at work with the work roles and responsibilities in reference to what you mentioned earlier with as your spreadsheets got bigger and bigger, you just didn't tell your boss and colleagues that you were struggling with the work with the spreadsheets and getting the numbers all together. And that's what you mean specifically by being open and vulnerable in a workplace environment.
Yes, specifically that. And then I do think that, if you're going through a very, very difficult time at home, I think it's nothing wrong in having a conversation with your boss and let them aware. Be aware that you're going through a difficult patch now, but we don't have to overshare and spread that all over the department and so on. It's not going to do good for anybody, right? But I would welcome if my team members have some challenges, including on Friday. One of our staff's houses was flooded all the way up to the roof, and her belongings were damaged and so on. And I found out about this, so I checked in with her, and she shared with me what was going through her mind and so on. I said, don't worry about work now, just leave it for now, and your team can cover and so on. And she very much appreciated that I checked in with her. So I think, that kind of vulnerability, I think also is fine. We shouldn't just be robots after all, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good distinction. My sponsor would always say, we don't have to lead with the chin. You don't always have to walk in there and tell them you're an alcoholic or an addict or whatever. I always sort of found that helpful. And obviously, for many people who don't struggle with those things, we don't have to, as you say, overshare with other things in our lives. And at the same time, there's a subtlety to that where acknowledging what is happening tends to be very helpful. And people, I think, for the most part, are more understanding and compassionate than we assume they are. Obviously, there's always an asshole here and there, right? Or someone who's going to use that against you. But I don't think that's as common as our fears suggest. And yeah, it was a nice way to put it. Okay, and now, what was the other thing? About your educational track or your curiosity, your pursuit. And people often describe it in this way. All the energy we put towards consuming substances or whatever, if we can just direct a little bit of that in the direction of taking care of ourselves, many wonderful things can happen. And can you describe a little bit more about your journey into the coaching? I know you also have a men's group. You had a men's group. I'm not sure if you're still running that now. Can you tell us a little bit about that stuff and how you're applying these skills to maybe a living amends type of idea, or just learning and growing and sharing your experience with the world?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I do have a men's group. We have 22 men inside this one, and it basically born from the idea that the 12-step program are so wonderful. It's so great to have a safe space where we can really be our authentic self and speak about the challenges we had. And I just thought that why should it only be for people who have an addiction? Don't other people without addictions also go through a difficult time? What about all the people in the gray zone, which is perhaps much bigger? What about if we just throw out that 10% of us are alcoholics, or we are addicts of some sort? What about the 30-40% perhaps who might be on the way to be, or so on? And that's where the idea was born of having then these men's group for people to discuss the challenges. And as it happened now, just in the last year in this men's group, there has been some men who realize having these conversations that maybe they have a drinking problem themselves, and they have started to attend 12-step program meetings to sort out the drinking, and quite a few of them, which wasn't my intention at all from the beginning, but just by the fact when you have a safe space and you speak up about your challenges and you are around like-minded, you start to question yourself. And that is a meeting we have once a week. We also have a group chat where we check in with each other every day. We start in the morning by writing something we are grateful for, and I kept up with this now for about 15 months. Every morning I've been writing my gratitude list, and this has made a wonderful positive spin to my days. I see much more what I have rather than what I'm lacking. And even if I would wake up a day and feeling that it's going in the wrong direction, this breaks the pattern, because I have to surrender to my prayer, my meditation, and writing that list. Sharing that then holds me accountable, and with that I'm on the track again, the right path. So the work continues, and I continue to study, and I constantly looking at other courses and trainings to do, and I just continue to absorb and try to pass it on as well.
Yeah, thank you. That gray zone idea, or the reality that outside of 12-step groups, it is very difficult to find some sort of common humanity peer network where we can just acknowledge our struggles and seek some sort of guidance and community support, which I think is connected some sense to the diminished religious nature of our societies, for sure, right? We don't have those traditions, and there's not a commentary on religion, just that's the reality of how our societies function for so long, and that void is clearly here. How did you, I'm genuinely curious about how you, maybe you described it already, conceptualize this group, and how have you brought in some of the values, if you will, or benefits of a 12-step type of approach to this group, and how do you see that going, and maybe a little more social commentary around that, if you have any.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been looking at the key concepts and the topics that are discussed in the 12-step programs, and certainly brought in all of those at certain extent, but also really being open for the men to share what is on their mind. It should be a safe space, and part of it is an agenda where we set a theme every time. But it can also be open-minded, and I think romantic relationship has been something that we discussed quite a lot, marriage and so on. Also children, we discussed fatherhood, manhood, masculinity, but other topics which are also a part of the recovery programs, so things like sleep, meditation, mindfulness, and those topics we covered as well. And I've been trying to not be, taking any much of a lead, rather than being the facilitator and making sure that everyone's voice is heard. The key is for everyone to feel that they have a chance to speak up and be heard, because for most of the men who joined this was new. If you haven't been in the world of recovery, it's quite a shock, and it takes a while for new men to get used to this. The level of honesty is perhaps another level.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's amazing. And can you maybe comment on, maybe I'll just describe my thoughts out loud and then see what you think. This idea of masculinity, what it means to be a man, all these conversations perhaps that have been a little out of balance in the public sphere. How have you seen people relate to the traditional, perhaps archetypal norms of that masculine archetype, which in its genuine form is actually quite healthy and admirable? And obviously it's on a spectrum, and everyone fits, where they fit. And I guess whatever you think is helpful or insightful in terms of how people come to relate to their masculinity and manhood in ways that are maybe more integrated or healthier or honest, something like that. And if you have any particular examples that you think are useful.
Yeah, and remember that I'm based now in Southeast Asia, so a lot of the men in my groups are actually Western men, most are Western, but they would be married local. So I have an Indonesian wife now who is Muslim, and many of us have, more local relationships where perhaps it's a more of a traditional view. And in that sense, it's really the men who are seen as the breadwinner. And even when you get married, you need to sign perhaps even a prenups agreement that you're responsible of putting food on the table and shelter. That's very much expected to the point. As I said, it will be part of a prenup agreement that you as the man are responsible. And so that is on the one side. But then we have the Western world where it's pushed for equality. So it's a very bit of a confusing place to be in that sense. Where do we stand in terms of that over here in Asia? Because most of us work perhaps for Western companies, and there the norms are pushed on, and we are supposed to implement it here locally. But again, Asia is big, and every country has different religions and cultures and laws and legislations. But in general, I would say it is more of the traditional view. It's perhaps a bit more like the Western world in perhaps the 70s, 80s is probably what we see around us here. So where it's more of the women are looking for a strong man, the man is the one who's supposed to work and provide for the family. That's still the case, even though that it's changing here as well.
Yeah, and I think there is a slight, and this is my own perspective, of course, arrogance of Westerners to assume that stuff is bad and backwards and wrong type of idea. And not necessarily so. I mean, maybe in some cases, yes, other cases, no. I don't per se have I don't think one is better. It's all contextual. That's such an interest. I never thought about that's so interesting as you describe Western, perhaps, leaders who have settled elsewhere where the cultural norms are different, and then how their workplace environment influences that. That's so fascinating. I can only imagine there's so many moments of general befuddlement, for lack of a better word, about the conversations going on in a workplace versus, well, if you walk outside this office in this town, somebody may have a different perspective on things. I don't know if you have any particular more you feel comfortable sharing around that, or any stories, or any perhaps Western companies that you've seen really address that honestly, as you've described so nicely, and as my experience of, I mean, the most beautiful gift for me in recovery is the idea of honesty and the willingness to just say what I think and feel. I still do fear repercussions, and I fear not being allowed to be myself and all these things. It doesn't hold me back in the way it did. Can you, any anecdotes or any stories of that cultural clash and just how you see people navigate it?
Yeah, and being from Sweden and having some links to the Swedish embassy and so on, I was part of writing a book here on women and men in the workplace in Singapore a few years ago, which was an initiative from the Swedish embassy, because the norm in Singapore is if you have a child, the woman would typically be home perhaps just a month or so, while in Sweden perhaps they will stay home on maternity leave for a year. And in Sweden, paternity leave is equal. Yeah, it's equal. In Singapore, though, the norm is like this. I think you're given 1 or 2 days as paternity leave, basically. And it would be socially unacceptable for the man sort of to take that. People will look at you and say, what are you doing? You just had a baby and you're taking a day off for this. And that is the completely different spectrum, right? Where in Sweden you were supposed to be at least a couple of months first, to be there all the time, to be supportive, and then throughout perhaps a year or 2 years, take a few days off every week to be there, to be a father, to be there by the child. So in that sense, it's quite... it's interesting to find yourself, between two extreme different worlds there, and that's why we wrote the book about it, the reflections on how different it is, and so on, and just trying to at least, be open and consider different views, and drive a conversation about it.
Yeah, wow. Can you tell us, is there anything else about that book or that process that was meaningful or interesting for you, and any other sort of conversations that have come out from that? It would be one question. And I'm not, maybe I'll just start with that and then I'll ask you the other question after.
Yeah, so I think this was about 3-4 years ago, and I think the conversation have excelled globally since that time. And I think the Asia is also driving those conversations, that the man has a role to play here, which wasn't the case before. And I think this was one of the leading initiatives in Singapore. And I remember one call to action at the time was that we asked companies to volunteer to go beyond the legislation. So if the legislation was that this was 1 or 2 days paternity leave, we encouraged organizations to make it 2 weeks as a benefit then for the father, so that the father could spend more time with the child. And I think we had about 25-30 companies to sign on something like that, including my own company actually, who then signed for that. So that was one thing that came out of it. So it wasn't only conversation, it was also some call to action where we can go above and beyond. And just because it's the legislation doesn't mean that we cannot go above and beyond that.
Ooh, that's super cool. And did you see perhaps traditional, I don't know, is it Singaporean? Is that a word? Is that how you say it? Or yeah,
Yeah.
did you see sort of traditional families take up those options, and any experiences with those people there?
Yeah, I received quite some criticism locally that this would be too expensive, at least for small SMEs and so on. How would they be able to afford sending the man home as well as the wife? So that was what many of the smaller firms said. Of course, for the larger organization, it's not as complicated. So I remember it was a conversation about that, but that was as far as it went, if I remember correctly.
Cool. Which is a real thing, obviously. Part of the larger social norms around these bigger topics. And what was the other thing I was going to ask you about that? It was. I've had many conversations about gender roles, if you will, and the differences between men and women socially and through interests and on average. We do know in the Scandinavian countries, which tend to be the most equal, if you will, between the genders, that at least the social science shows that when societies are more equal, the gender norms actually get bigger. So in Sweden, Scandinavian countries, more women tend to do more women-based jobs, and more men tend to do more men-based jobs because they're allowed to freely choose, which is kind of contrary to many people's opinions of what men and women would tend to choose on their own. We tend to think the opposite, right? And I guess I'm dancing around it without just saying what I think is implied. But I'm not sure how you think about those things, and maybe in Asia, or at least your experience, Southeast Asia, etc., how that conversation goes. Is it being had? Maybe you already described that. Any thoughts on that? And does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense, and yeah, the conversation is a bit immature here. I remember being in Philippines doing some work for one of our clients there 3 weeks ago, and the road sign still says "men at work" when you pass road work. It doesn't say road work; it says "men at work." And there's a warning there. Yes, we start to see some females in that industry as well, and particularly I see in Thailand and Vietnam in the construction we see women, quite a lot of women in the construction sites. The traditional view is that it's still a men's work, and the roles are quite set over in Asia still.
Yeah. And I think we assume in the West that there's something wrong with that. And I don't think that that's true per se. This is, again, my own opinion. Uh, and what we see, again, is the more freely people can choose, the more they tend to choose the roles that align with their gender or sex or whatever it is. So simultaneously, yes, it's nice for women to be able to do more traditionally masculine roles, and it's nice for men to be able to do more traditionally feminine roles, although they don't tend to choose those other roles when they have the choice, which again is sort of contrary to what we assume is virtuous and right. And I just find it so interesting, and bringing it back to the yearning for honesty and openness, and the ability to have difficult conversations. I think we have a lot to go in that domain of things. Do they have these conversations openly in Asia, and they just resort to their norms, or are these conversations not being had often? I'm curious.
Not held so often. It's starting, but not so often. Yeah, but we start to see it. The big MNCs, the big corporates at least, are having the conversations, and the embassies and so on. Yeah.
Okay, and one thing I need to say is my I have to start paying for my parking outside of my office in 4 minutes. So I'm gonna have to turn on my phone and feed the fucking meter when in 4 minutes. So I don't want to forget to do that. I'm sort of reminding myself, and I just want to let you know that I'm gonna have to pause for about a minute to do that.
Fantastic.
But perhaps any other kind of, I think I've asked you generally like most of the questions. You do talk about loneliness in sports as well, and so I think it's analogous to the executive stuff. Obviously, different context, but I'm curious. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how you see? I was just watching, this fits perfectly. I've been watching the Netflix show, the reality show about the PGA golfers. I don't know if you've seen this. I think it's called Full Swing. Have you seen that? Have you heard of that show?
I haven't watched that one, no, but I should.
Okay,
I guess.
it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I think I'm on season 2 or something. I think it's now in season 3 or 4. But in the episode I watched last night, actually, they contrasted 2 golfers. Both of them had lost their mothers 10 years prior or whatever. Both of them were struggling with the mental side of the game. One of them, well, they were both very resistant to getting a sports psychologist. That's just the fancy language we use to allow athletes to ask for help. And so one of them, the caddies, both were pushing the players to get help for the mental game. One did, and within 6 months started winning tournaments, then won the US Open, which is incredible. I can't remember the guy's name. It was such a beautiful story to watch. And the other golfer, I don't know what happens in the next episode, of course, but he was super resistant. And then he finally agreed at the end of the last episode that he would talk to somebody, which is great to see. So I'm just kind of curious how you see all this applying to athletes and in sport, and maybe if you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm surrounded by good athletes here in Phuket, Thailand. It's a triathlon camp here, which is led by one of the legends in the sport of Ironman. He was 8 times top 10 in the World Championship in Kona, Hawaii. His name is Jürgen Sack. He runs a camp here. So the best athletes from...
Is he a Swedish guy?
He's German.
Oh, it's German, okay.
Yeah, but many of the athletes from all around the world are coming here to train. So therefore I'm surrounded by athletes. And I mean, the sport of Ironman, like many other sports, is partly a mental game. You got to be out there, you got to be grilled, and the training also is very, very hard and takes a lot of time. So it is a big mental game, and that's where much of this is won. Yeah, you gotta be able to fight the demons and hang in there. But it's also about, being resilient and not giving up, but also being smart about it, to know when to give up. And that's why, the more vulnerable, the more open you are, the better you are with your coaches, the more honest you are with them, the better they can help you. So I'm glad to hear the golf example of getting a sports psychologist, and that's also big in the sport of Ironman. If you want to reach the top, you need to work your mental game as well as your physical.
And do you see the same patterns emerging where, I mean, you kind of described it, where people are struggling with some aspect of the sport or their personal life or whatnot, and when they do open up and acknowledge it, it enhances their performance? And any particular, maybe you can speak about yourself or whatnot, how you see that enhancing overall performance and achievement.
Yeah, in my case, it's completely night and day. I mean, the fact that I reached top 10%, the top 2% in the world in my age group, that was thanks to being open, vulnerable, and listen, and sharing the challenges I have. I keep being completely honest, and I see it in others as well when they are trying to do it themselves. Then it's more pushing through. Rather than really listening to your body and mind and think what is happening. As of now, with all the apps as well and all the wearable devices, we can do some magic if you have a coach to. And the combination then of wearing a heart rate meter, and the power meter and all the data. If you give the coach the data, plus you add a comment after each session, how you felt about it, they can pretty much manage you much better and give you a tailor-made training plan. They know when to push you, when to hold you back, and you can basically see your fitness level, and many parameters to make sure that you get the right rest. We measure the sleep, measure the weight, and also then so you can do proper tapering coming into a race and being in your very best form. And everyone respond differently to different food and trainings and so on, and we can also then test, which I done. I tested different diets, different nutrition. I gone vegan for 1 month, for example, and then measure everything. My coach can see the differences. I also tried with sleeping experiment last year, which I actually did a TEDx talk about. I was on TEDx talking about this sleeping experiment, and part of it was that I really doubled down on sleep. 2 identical races, half Ironman races. One where I trained and slept like normal. One where I doubled down on sleep. So I did everything I could. I wrote an article also with 100 sleeping tips. Everything from earplugs, taping my mouth, to the right temperature, blackout windows, and the right diet, and going in bed really early and so on. And really trying to sleep as much as I possibly could. And during that race, broke all my records. So basically my conclusion of that was that you can sleep your way to success.
That's awesome. That's amazing. When I do, that's a side note, but when I do intakes with clients, often they describe all these challenges or problems. Usually I ask them up front, sleep, but if not, when it gets around to the sleep question, so often people are like, oh, I sleep like shit, or I have such a hard time sleeping, or I whatnot. And it's amazing how much sleep influences everything. And if people can just sort of get that sorted out to some degree, amazing things can happen. I even have a mattress that I roll out on the floor in my office back here, and I have naps all the time. It's amazing. I'm not a sleep expert per se, but I think I'm pretty good at it.
I love that.
Yeah, it's awesome. Any things, just sort of small anecdotes that really, out of your the list of 100 things, which ones for you in particular were really helpful, or that helped you deal with your sleep? And maybe also, what were some of the struggles that you had with sleep?
Yeah, the best have been really being brutal on the calendar, really block the time for it, set the time for it, really be aware. I also put an alarm when it was time towards going to bed, not when time to sleep, and really having that wind down hour. And I tried to go to bed ridiculously early, so that meant 8 p.m. being in bed reading a book, and then with the aim of trying to sleep by 9 p.m., which meant that I would be up at 4 to 6 a.m. the next day, ready for every goodies that come with good early morning, plus then training. So that really helped, being disciplined, and also communicate it clearly to people, because the fact that I was doing this for a TEDx talk seemed like a valid excuse. Like you say, it's socially acceptable to not sleep well, and people are ragging about it. I now could leave every party, could leave every dinner saying, I'm sorry, I need to go home now because I'm doing a sleeping experiment. And then people asked, oh yeah, I'm doing a TEDx, so I need to make sure that I'm sleeping on time. Then people didn't push you any further, they let you go. So that really worked. I didn't, therefore break my strong discipline. And for anyone who's wearing the devices who have seen, the feedback is if you sleep at a similar time, the repetitive pattern, you normally get extra points for that because you're sleeping well. So that's what happened to me. And once you fall into a good rhythm and so on, then it's just you sleep a lot better and a lot easier. So that was some of the things that really, really helped me. And I think in addition to sleeping with earplugs, and then questionable of taping the mouth, not recommended for everyone. They say you should check with your doctor and do it carefully and know what you're doing when you play with it. But I played with it, and it really helped me because then you're resetting your DNA, and you start nasal breathing instead of breathing for your nose, breathing for your mouth when you sleep, and that just cemented me into even deeper sleep.
Nice. I know my mom experimented with that for a while, taping the mouth. I'm not sure if she still does or not. Cool. Thank you. That's great. And do you still follow that now? Are you pretty rigid with your sleep, like going to bed time, or how do you, after the experiment, have you sort of gone back to more balance, or how are you navigating sleep now?
No, I'm pretty good with the sleep. I think I picked up, the good habits, and they stick with me. Quite a lot of them stick with me, and I have slept much better. And I'm keeping an eye on the numbers, the data, and so on. And I'm alarmed if it's not good, and then I'm doing something to fix it. So it's been a good journey. But I think for anyone in recovery, the first couple of days and weeks maybe it's tough to sleep, but after that we say perhaps that it's worth sobering up just for the sleep by itself.
That's nice. Oh, wow. Awesome. Okay. I think I'm trying to, any other sort of topics or things that are meaningful for you now, that we haven't discussed, or anything else you're working on that you want to share? Yeah.
No, I think you have covered quite a lot, Mike, and I think in general is that I'm trying my best for everything we discussed today. Why a lot of it is centered in the world of recovery, or the ideas come from there. I'm trying to bring it to the masses because we're all human beings, and everyone is struggling at the end of the day, and it doesn't matter if it's alcohol or drug or social media addiction, or if it's sugar addiction or food addiction, which perhaps are the addictions that are not so spoken about. But when you have a deep, honest conversation with someone, many are struggling with both sugar addiction and food addiction, eating on emotions and feelings rather than eating for the sake of it being nutritionist. So I think in that sense, it's great to have these, as you also said, these honest, brutal conversations, and without being challenged to have them, Mike. So thanks for creating this safe space for that.
Cool. Thank you so much. When I can be honest, I definitely have somewhat of a sugar addiction. I've been navigating there's a part of me that thinks everything else in my life is really good. And I eat a little bit too much sugar. And I don't know if it's just that little voice in my head that never wants me to be happy and content. And at the same time, there's some reality in the fact that I just eat a bit too much sugar. And I was talking to a mentor the other day who is very qualified, so to speak, sort of professionally and also personally. And that person said to me something like, it just tastes so good, or it's so good to just have sugary cereal at night. And it's something like that, like where it's like, yes, it does. And we don't have to be perfect and all these other things. And then at the same time, part of me knows that I eat a bit too much sugar, and it would probably be helpful if I didn't. I don't know if you have any feedback on that through your health journey and et cetera, but I'm looking for a little bit of insight here, either to uh, rationalize my denial or allow me to accept myself for who I am.
Yeah, and I think I'm guilty of that as well, Mike. I think also perhaps if finding ourselves in recovery, we sort one addiction out, it's something else comes around. So it's about picking the better of the worst, right? So, and I think you've done a great job there. And I think we also cannot be too hard on ourselves after all, right? We're not supposed to be perfect, right? It's a journey of progress, not perfection. So I think we're all good.
Indeed. Cool. Maybe one last thing is, which I didn't ask you about, is your experience as a father, as a parent, how that is going, or how you think about that, if it's any different then. I think one thing I struggle with is I have so much training in mindfulness or Buddhist psychology, more specifically, where the balance between acknowledging our roles and our labels and identities out in the world, which does matter, of course, versus not being attached to those things and identifying through them. And I don't really know how I think about it, to be honest. I have two kids. I'm curious what you think about being a father, or how you identify with that and how that influences your daily life.
Yeah, so my son and I have a bit of a unique relationship, and like many would have when you've been in recovery. So separated from him when he was 5, he moved to Sweden with his mom. And for 3 years I was pretty distant, and he was 5 to 8 years of age. To call back home, trying to have a conversation then was useless, right? And I only saw him once a year. So we didn't build a strong bond then, and that got to me when I sobered up. So then he was 8 years of age, and I actually started to see a child psychologist then, because it really hurt me to know that I couldn't really have a deep conversation with him. I didn't know how to communicate, and I asked for help because like everything else, I was in the space then of making the best, and I wanted to be the best father I could be. So I asked everyone I could. I was doing all the research I could to find people who could help me to become a better father. I came to them being honest and explained what happened. And I remember this child psychologist who was working with children, obviously. She said, "You're the first father who ever come to express this." And she was also shocked and surprised about my honesty and how I looked at myself. And
Yeah. Wow.
and she started to coach me and help me, including and having conversations with my ex-wife to ask for a list of. She asked me to ask her to draw a list of all the friends he had, the names of them, who they were, what hobbies they did, and what they did together. Also the name of all the teachers and something about them. She also said I should get a schedule of his school and so on, and his activities, and really study them so I knew them. And that's what I did. So then he's about 8-9 years of age, and at least when I'm having phone calls with him and video calls, I could check in with him and ask him, and being a bit curious about some things I knew what was happening, because before I didn't have much insight. It was very difficult, but still the conversation were a bit shallow. So that's when she then asked me to really map out what all the things he liked to do, what was his hobbies and so on. And of course then he was 9. So he started getting into computer gaming, and that's when I went back home to see him in Sweden. I got him a computer, set it up with webcam and headset and everything, and using the equipment I have here. I started then to play video gaming multiplayer every Saturday afternoon when I was back in Singapore. I blocked basically 3 hours every Saturday afternoon, and the games he wanted to play, Minecraft for example, I spent really a lot of time and effort learning how to play the game. And as I came into the game, he started to show me around, and typically he would spend his week to build new worlds and new structures and things. And when I came in on the weekend, he was spending those hours walking around showing me everything he did. So I basically came into his world, and I was there on his terms. And somehow we built a very, very strong and deep connection during that time. Something that is unique now, and he really, really speak openly and honestly with me. He has had, like many teenagers, gone through some big challenges. There's been everything from drugs and theft and knives in school, and there's been bullying. There's been all kind of things happening. And he has spoken to me on the phone about everything quite openly and asking for my feedback and what he should do and so on. And I have thrown the question back at him and coached him and never judged him, but rather been there, someone who can listen and have conversations with him. So in that sense, we have, through those years, again, by me being completely curious, very, very much looking at myself and being open to wanting to be a better father, admitting that I wasn't the best, that really have helped us to turn that around.
That's very touching. Thank you for that honesty. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. Good. That's amazing. Yeah, very touched by that. That's very difficult to talk about too, I imagine, or was at some point or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Nick, thank you so much. That is beautiful. I guess that hard to top that story, so to speak. Yeah, thank you so much. So maybe lastly, just what do you, I guess you kind of told me a lot already. Anything we haven't discussed that you're working on now, or what are your plans for the next, little bit of time? And then, I will say goodbye or let you go kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm looking at finishing my studies in the next year, so then I will be a counselor and a psychotherapist and can help the people who have come to me now when I'm a coach, but perhaps I'm not qualified to really help them, and I'm also going to study addiction, so I will be an addiction therapist who can help those with those challenges. Some might want to speak to someone who's been there before, someone who's gone through it, because with addiction it's very difficult for someone who hasn't been there to be able to help. That's what I sense and I understand, because and also for the person who have been suffering, they prefer many times to work with someone who's been there. So that's really something I'm looking forward to. As of now, I remain a sober coach and I can work with gray zone drinkers, but I guess that's a bit like the ones who want to do it because of health reasons, as opposed to someone who have done it because their life has become unmanageable, which is what it certainly was in my case. But I'm glad to be on the other side and now looking at ways to help others.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Nick, thank you so much for sharing all this with me and whoever is listening. It's very inspiring stuff, and I wish you the best and all those type of things on your journey. And sincerely, with gratitude, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike.
I am very grateful that you watched to the end of this video. Please click one of the boxes to watch more of our content, and otherwise have a great day. Peace out.